Good morning and welcome to the Historic Site Preservation Board meeting of Tuesday, March 13th, 2017. May we have the roll call, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair.
Until I tell you that we're recording?
Oh,
Thank you.
Sorry, we thought you were ready.
good morning and welcome to the Historic Site Preservation Board meeting of Tuesday, March 13th, 2017. May we have the roll call, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Member Hayes.
Here.
Member Lavoy.
Here.
Member Dixon.
Present.
Member Kaiser.
Here.
Member Marsh. Vice Chair Burkett.
Here.
And Chair Johns.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thanks. And the report on the posting of the agenda, please.
Mr. Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, March the 8th. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
All right, thank you. And acceptance of the agenda.
Move to accept.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much. Public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. So, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, we have no public hearings on the agenda this morning. So if you would like to address the board, now is the time to do so. Anyone in the audience wishing to speak, please come forward. Please introduce yourself and good morning.
Good morning. I'm Ron Marshall from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. I wanted to report to you that last month the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation published Concrete Screen Block, The Power of Pattern. And the intent of the book was to inform preservation efforts across the country with regard to the preservation of this building material. The intent was to identify rare patterns, to give a little context with regard to the history of screen block within the overall modernist movement. And we're happy to say we've already sold 500 copies of it. I'm here today to give a copy to the planning staff in furtherance of their official duties. And I remind them it is for official use only and not to be enjoyed. We are, in fact, we did a lecture in conjunction with this book during Modernism Week, and we've been asked by the Nevada Preservation Foundation to reprise the lecture in Nevada. So if you missed it the first time, Bill, I'd like to point out that it's going to be given in Las Vegas on April 28th at 5:30, 30 minutes after happy hour. And it's a free lecture, Bill. I know that'll appeal to you also. And that's part of the Las Vegas or Nevada Preservation Foundation's Home and History program. And I think you're also still allowed back in Las Vegas, Lynn, as I recall. Maybe. So if you get an opportunity, it'll be given in Las Vegas again on April 28th. And maybe we'll see you there if you missed it this time around at Modernism Week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Before I ask if anyone else would like to speak, I would mention that the book is, if you haven't received a copy of the book or purchased a copy of the book, it has a great local impact. Not only was it written by Ron and Barbara Marshall, the book was designed by Gary Wexler. There are a lot of local references. There is an area of Indian Canyon where there are 19 examples of the block in one particular area. So it really does have a great, it's a great resource for us here in Palm Springs, although it is nationally curated, I guess. But so I highly recommend the book. Anyone else in the audience wishing to address the board this morning? All right, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Chris Minrad, President of Palm Springs Modern Committee, and I'm here apropos my last time that I was here talking about one of the preservation issues, and we at the ModCom went back and kind of thought a little bit about what we had been talking about, and we reached out to our attorney, and we have crafted, and I've got a copy for everyone, including the staff, what we think, this had to do with the integrity question. Would you mind passing those?
Would you reference the proper, what you're speaking about?
It was the William Holden
Okay,
house, the
understood.
one that was.
All right.
And so we went and talked to her, and she looked at our president. And it seemed in that meeting there was a definite question about, well, this isn't really written or codified or anything of that nature. So we had her look at it, look at other preservation ordinances that other cities in California have, and craft this. And everything in red is what we have suggested could be added to our ordinance. And probably the most important thing on it is page 3, the first red thing under Class 1, where it says a Class 1 historic site being nominated for architectural merit must manifest integrity of design, material, and workmanship. And then integrity is defined earlier on pages 1 and 2. So we would like to offer this as a recommendation that maybe everyone could kind of take a look at it, move forward, see if this is something that I think could be implemented and kind of codify and clarify our preservation ordinance, essentially, to integrate this very important term, integrity. And that's basically what I'm here to deliver.
All right, well, thank you very much.
And that is a copy for you. Thank you.
Seeing anyone else in the audience wishing to, all right, please, thank you, good morning. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Barbara Marshall. I'm with the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. The Palm Springs Preservation Foundation over the last several years has published a series of postcards. Our postcards are called This is Palm Springs, and we've featured over the years a number of different properties in Palm Springs. This past February, we featured the Hideaway Hotel, formerly called the Town and Desert. And the reason that we did that is because we are going to be celebrating Herbert Burns Weekend on March 23rd and 24th. I'd like to tell the board and all your listeners, if you haven't heard about it, there will be a lecture on Friday evening the 23rd. There will be a tour on Saturday afternoon, followed by a cocktail event on Saturday evening. More importantly, the weekend is going to include the release of our next tribute journal entitled The Design of Herbert W. Burns. It's going to be an 82-page journal. We're really excited about it because author, PSPF board member Stephen Keelan had the good fortune to actually be able to track down some Burns family members and obtained a huge variety of family photos and background information on the life of Herbert Burns. So if you haven't bought your ticket yet, go to the www.pspreservationfoundation.org and check out the events. All of the information, tickets, and background information is there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And on that note, local preservationist Tracy Conrad wrote an extensive piece in Sunday's paper called Thanks for the Memories, talking specifically about Herbert Burns. So certainly becoming more important and being more recognized. Another one of our local architects or local architectural designers who 10 years ago was little known, and today we're learning a lot more about his projects. So that's all I can say about that. Seeing no one else in the audience wishing to come forward to speak, we will close the public comment. All right, thank you. Flynn, Mr. Minrad delivered this proposed revision to Palm Springs Historic Preservation Ordinance and then promptly left the room. Should we take some action on this, or we're just looking at it, reviewing it? This seems like quite an extensive revision to the local ordinance.
Yes, because you received this as part of public comment, you cannot take any action on it today, but if you'd like to schedule it for discussion, that's something that we could do on a later agenda.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Okay, coming back to the agenda, item number 1 on our agenda is the consent calendar, and this is approval of the minutes, February 2018 HSPB meeting. Because we have a fairly light agenda today and some extensive minutes from the February meeting, I'd ask the board to please, if we will, do you have any questions, concerns, edits, or changes to the minutes? If you didn't have a chance to go through them, I would take that time right now. I have a couple of not so much edits as they are some comments about the minutes. So if I could, on page 7, no, wait a minute, let me find my minutes. On page 7 of 8, under the discussions on the, this would be under item 4, new business, 4A, to reference it as the Shell gas station. There were a number of things here. We approved that project with quite a few conditions, and I believe we also then assigned a subcommittee of Lavoie and Hayes. And I'm curious as to whether there's been any follow-up by the subcommittee yet.
No, not yet. We haven't received the drawings that we can submit to the subcommittee, but we will notify them once we have drawings for them to review.
Okay. And again, when I reviewed the minutes, I didn't see, let me find exactly what I was referring to. At the bottom of page 6, the last sentence says, Member Hayes expressed concern about cutting the structural slab. At the top of page 7, Staff Lyon explained that the lights are LED, can be cut to the length of 8 feet. I feel like there's a little disconnect in the minutes between the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7. Todd, do you feel that this expressed what you needed it to express in the minutes?
So I think what probably needs to be done is it just at the end of that sentence needs to be added of roof structure. I think would probably resolve the confusion perhaps because people are going to assume a slab is a floor, not a roof.
Right. I think that's the detail I was missing. Because there was quite a bit of discussion about the roof structure, not cutting into the structure, it being a poured concrete structure. And again, as I reviewed the minutes, I didn't see much discussion on that. So I would defer to members Lavoie and Hayes because it really was their addressing the concrete canopy and going with the additional the valance at the western edge of the roof. I just felt that the minutes should contain a little bit more detail on that. So, Bill, did you have any thoughts on that, please? Did I catch you off guard there? It's
No,
number 4.
it's,
Bill, is your mic on, please? Thank you.
thank you. I think add my name to Lavoie and Hayes expressed concern about cutting the structural slab. And I would call it the roof canopy because I think that's how it's referred to.
Okay.
usually.
Yeah. All right. I thought the minutes were terrific, but I did find that I remembered there was quite a bit of conversation about, to use the word integrity, the integrity of the canopy and not to compromise it at all by adding any new channels or what have you. So they're going to achieve the new lighting by adding the valance on the western end. Okay? Anything else on that? Any other questions on the minutes? Okay, I'll take a motion to accept.
Move to approve with changes made to staff.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Okay. Item number 2 on the agenda is public hearings, and there are none. 3, unfinished business, and we have none. And 4, new business, we have none. So we will come to discussions. 5, before we begin, Flynn, the reason I asked if Mr. Lyon was going to be here this morning is that I did email him and ask him for a update on the Steve Mcqueen property. Do you have an update for us?
We will have that under staff comments.
Okay, excellent. Because I have, I brought some notes, again, based on the minutes that we just approved and reviewed. And that's kind of why I asked for a follow-up on the Mcqueen property. So we'll do that under staff comments. Okay, excellent. All right, so the first discussion item is 5A. This is the 2018 National Preservation Month Symposium, April 15th, 2018. Just coming about a month from now. So Dick, will you take it from here?
Yes, I will. The first thing that I first of all highlighted, sorry, the items that we should really focus on today. But the first thing I would like to do is we have a very, I think, very interesting announcement. We've been talking about having a guest of honor that relates to the subject matter this year of how did Hollywood influence Palm Springs history and architecture. And so we thought it'd be very befitting if we could find a well-known personality that has a connection back to this period. And just yesterday, I received the positive acceptance by Trini Lopez to be our guest of honor and to actually speak probably just for 5 to 10 minutes at the very most. And and I think that this will be also a interesting draw for our event. So we decided to do something a little bit different this year. So Trini will be with us. He's very excited. I spoke with the producer of the movie, Sinatra in Palm Springs. And by the way, that is going to be screened again at the Camelot from March 24th to April the 5th. It is a really great documentary also about Palm Springs. And also we're going to be able to use some of the clips in that movie as part of our sort of a backdrop, if you will, at the event. There's particularly one of the helicopter going across all of Palm Springs that's really quite exciting, but it is really a historical reference for architecture and the life of Frank Sinatra in this town. On the tours, finalizing the last one right now, met with homeowners yesterday, and that's at the bottom of the list. There are 2 residences that I've found by Howard Lapham, and since Lapham is going to be on one of the presentations at our event, very excited that now we will have, besides the Desert Star being a Lapham Deepwell residence, there's 2 residences. One is the one on Manzanita that did a lot of research on this and uncovered that through actually some of Patrick McGrew's at the A&D Center. And met with the homeowners yesterday, and there are two different, the one house has all original St. Charles kitchen, original bathrooms, and the other house, even though architecturally it hasn't been messed with except in a couple of places, it's a whole different scene on the inside. But it definitely shows, and the diversity of the work is quite amazing as well. And I think that Robert Ember is going to step up to the plate and guide those two tours, that tour. The other thing I'd like to talk about is volunteer assignments during the event. I sort of like semi-drafted based upon the last few years to see if the board members would be willing to do the respective assignments that are listed in blue. And unless I have any objection to that, may I consider that as done? Okay. And of course, Gary's going to be the host, so he's certainly going to have his hands full, and I'll be the floater around to whatever comes up, sort of thing. And then I've listed all the different categories of other people I'll be assigning. On the day 2 workshop, where we're bringing in the California Preservation Foundation, which I'm very excited about. You know, we've been talking about education for the realtors now for the last year or so. And I'm really happy that Cindy Heitzman is putting together this workshop. And member Hayes is going to be a part of a 5-person panel, actually. And the whole idea of this workshop is to dispel some of the myths that's out there in the, I think, in the realtor community. There'll be discussions about, Ken Lyon's going to be talking about the different designations and so that people have a better understanding. There'll be discussions about marketing the program and how realtors can market successfully when a property is designated or being considered to be designated. And the representative from the Riverside County will be here as part of the panel, and he's going to be talking about the Mills Act and the tax advantages that are available to the client. So the Board of Realtors, I'm very happy to report, is behind this. They tell me 100%. They're just waiting for the promotion piece to be done by Cindy, which I'm anticipating will be done actually tomorrow or the next day. And then they'll be putting it out to their board, all their people, rather. And we'll give them about 4 or 5 days to be the first ones to register. And then we would then be able to open it up to the public at large. I think it's something that the board members really, I'd urge you to attend as well. And I think what's really cool is that Flynn has made arrangements that we can hold this in the council chambers, and that being a class 1 and bringing in the California Preservation Foundation, I think that that's a great venue for us to have. So that is well underway, and I'm just working with Cindy, finalizing the last few details. And that is pretty much it, except please all pray that things go smoothly. And I think it's going to be a great event. I'm getting a lot of advance interest in the event. Oh, one last thing. I'm wanting to create a list. What we do is, oh, and by the way, we're talking about this going out to last year's attendees, which we've been doing the last couple of years, to have a 48-hour advance opportunity to be the first to register for the symposium and then the tours and then the event, after event. And then it will go out live to the public. I've been in contact with the different, all the 5 organizations that we've had in the past who have been beautifully supported us with email blast and putting it in the newsletter. It really drives our traffic. So after that 48 hours, then I will send out another note to the organizations and to the Chamber of Commerce, who's been very, very supportive, to also get that word out. Also, I have very, very fortunate, I think, Bob Bogard has offered his services to help us promote the event at no charge and get us more press and to get us out into possibly other forms of media like radio and TV. So I'm meeting with him this week and to get that going as well so that we can really get the word out. And I think that's pretty much it. Any questions anyone has?
When is the sign-up going to go out to the first 48 hours and then the public?
Yeah, well, right. The first
When is that
48
gonna
hours
start?
is actually going to be either tomorrow or Wednesday
okay.
or Thursday. So I've been working with David.
Yeah. So if we're adding tours, we need to build that to the website.
He has all of that.
I thought
The
we were
last
adding
tour?
He has all but the last one,
Yeah.
which he'll have today.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we still have to construct that, though.
The last one, yeah,
Yeah.
So
right.
probably
yeah. So maybe
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's when it's planned to go, and then it'll go out to the public 2 days after that.
So we should be looking for something in our mailboxes Thursday, Friday?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, exactly.
Todd?
How many people does the council chambers hold?
120. Plus the people up in the dais, and then, where the staff sits, that's an addition to 120. So I counted them with Joanne to be sure.
Wow. Dick, a couple of quick things, please. And again, this is shaping up to be another amazing event, and I can't acknowledge you and the subcommittee enough for the detail and the effort that you're putting forth on this. Are the preservation organizations, you mentioned the same 5 or the 5, and they're all confirmed?
Yes.
Okay.
They've confirmed.
To have tables like we've had in the past?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. The Cpf conference that follows on day 2, which is that Monday, I see Bill and Vincent mentioned here. Are they going to be helping with the registration? And then Todd is on the panel, so that's 3 of the board members.
Right.
I would encourage the rest of the HSPB to be there as well, and I
Yes.
will commit to being there.
Wonderful.
I just think it's important, and beside the fact that I'm a Realtor, I just think the HSPB, if we can, be there to partake in this. I think it's very important, so I would encourage the HSPB members to can commit to being there on that Monday. Any other questions for Dick on this? Okay. All right, Dick, thank you very much. Again, as I mentioned, shaping up to be really a wonderful symposium.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Good.
So, Dick, you just under discussions, I think we just wrapped 5A and 5B into the same discussion. So we'll move on to 5C. This is a discussion of possible ordinance to address review process for remodeling of historic structures. And I hope that we will spend some time on this. I printed it up myself at home last night so that I could review it. So I'll open the discussion.
Maybe let me just do a little
Please.
bit of preface,
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. Just to remind you of this discussion, back in January, we heard testimony of renovations that were done and partial demolition that was done to a structure that was not a Class 1 structure. It was a Class 3 structure, and so there was concern on the part of the board in terms of how do we address that. And so if you are to discuss changes to the ordinance, what I wanted to do is give you a framework for that discussion to help lead you in terms of what you want to achieve and what you want to accomplish by doing that. First of all, what you might consider is what should this apply to? And so you're defining what would this ordinance apply to? Since you are the Historic Site Preservation Board, I'm assuming that has to be some type of historic structure, and so most likely that would apply to Class 3 structures. But again, that's something that you need to address. Secondly, think about what should be the threshold requirements for Historic Site Preservation Board review. At what point would these types of actions need to come before you? Typically in our code, we have some type of a threshold requirement. For example, for architectural review, you need to add on 400 square feet or do some other defined change to the property, which would then require it to go before our architectural advisory committee. And so in a similar fashion, you'd need to establish some type of threshold requirement of when this would be required to come before the board. Another thing that you need to think about is criteria for evaluation. All of our boards and committees that review applications have established criteria for either approving or denying the applications, and so that's another thing that we need to think about. Also, in terms of setting the applicability of this ordinance, what's going to be the volume of applications that we would have come before you? Do we have adequate staff to address that? Would we need to do additional HSPB meetings? Again, things that we need to take into consideration. And then finally, kind of looking at the purpose, the overall purpose. How does this fit in with the mission of the Historic Site Preservation Board? Does it address goals that we have in our general plan? So those are things that we typically do as part of any ordinance adoption, is how does it fit into the city's larger mission? So again, these are just some thoughts in terms of discussion points, and with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. So I would recommend that I'm not sure we're going to solve this entire issue today. I think this is the beginning of a conversation. When Mr. Lavoie smiles at me, I take that as an affirmation. So why don't we follow staff's lead and talk about these as they are given us as bullet points. Linda, you've brought a project to the board's attention, one that you and I are both aware of in Indian Canyons. Dick, you have carried a lot of water on this subject. Todd, Bill, you've also brought to the board's attention a project. I think it was the John Porter Clark House recently. So I think that we have enough personal input on this that we should be able to go through these one by one and at least begin to define what we would want to see changed in an ordinance. So let's start with the first bullet point. It's the applicability, if I've pronounced that correctly, to what types of structures? All Class 3 structures, residential structures only, commercial structures only? Should the proposed discretionary, to what should the proposed discretionary review apply? So certainly taking the most recent house into question here, it was the John Porter Clark House. It was certainly a Class 3, known architect. It was of the Spanish style, and it went through whatever city's review process it did, and it was allowed to tear everything down except a supporting wall or a chimney and a rebuild. So I think that we want to certainly avoid that from happening, continuing to happen, or ongoing. So it begs the question, all Class 3 structures? And so all Class 3 structures, again, would be?
Any structure that was built prior to 1969, and so that would be residential, commercial. And the question is, do you want to see all of those?
I would just add to that. We have another discussion, or we've been having another conversation sort of in the background about rolling that date. So it wouldn't be 1969
So
fixed.
in the future, it would be a rolling date
Yes.
of anything that's 35 years old
Okay.
or older.
So 35 years. Yeah,
We had talked about either 40 or 35, and I believe that we landed on 35.
I believe that to be true, 35 years or older. All right, so then, is this the place to add that language into here?
We already will have that in the works.
Okay,
I think we could just say Class 3, and then whatever time period that we have assigned to Class 3 will be applicable.
excellent. Okay, does the board feel good about that? Todd?
So then, if that gets adopted, then when somebody fills out a permit application and it says that the home was built in 1954, that would trigger that.
It's already a Class 3, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? So it would be all Class 3 properties, commercial, residential? Please, Mr. Lavoy?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
this is what we do in Santa Barbara, and our meetings last 5 to 6 hours long. We have, and they're getting longer. As part of that effort, we have a city historian who does a preliminary evaluation of the property. And if it meets certain criteria or a number of criteria, then she does the first design review. It happens to be a woman. They do a design review. And for her, to assist her in that, we have a very clear set of guidelines as to what the threshold is. Certain minor things like window replacement in kind are just fine, they can rubber stamp them. And then a set of guidelines as to what is an appropriate addition or change to an historic resource. And if it's more than the threshold, then we do review it. But that person will write a letter to the board, commission, presenting her evaluation of what those changes are. And it makes our job a lot easier. It makes, and those guidelines are fairly detailed because of the many different styles of architecture in Santa Barbara. What is appropriate to one might not be appropriate to another, and how to go about adding on and changing an historic resource. That also gives the public a very clear guideline of what they know what they can do and can't do. And yes, we see things happen that aren't, and they get denied. But you need those guidelines both for this board, unfamiliar with design review, and the public. And that's where you need to start the discussion. And that doesn't always prevent things from happening. So if we see, if the historian sees a project that might qualify for a higher level of designation, we have different tiers in Santa Barbara, then she will require an historic structures report. And that the first one will evaluate if the building merits preservation. And then a second report evaluates the work being proposed to the Secretary of Interior standards. And it's an effort that preserves a lot of the historic buildings and significant buildings, but does allow buildings that don't rise to the level of significance to just go away. And recently we saw I had a meltdown in a meeting. A house that came to us that qualified as would be a class 2 in the city. While the historic structures report was being written, was stripped down to the studs, and the new windows cut into it. And we found out, like, integrity. You can imagine the argument I had. So they went to the lawyers. CEQA requires that if work is done illegally on a building without a permit, then you evaluate the building before the work was done, not after or during. Next meeting's going to be lovely. So those are some of the things, you know, this board's going to be facing if this city proceeds this way. It's necessary if you want to preserve historic resources that are important, but you have to know that some aren't going to be worth saving.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
are there, and Bill, you may know the answer to this, are there communities out there that have an ordinance similar to what we're constructing, maybe not as in-depth as Santa Barbara's? Are there examples of what we're looking at, what direction we're trying to move towards? I mean, this is a big assignment when you don't have anything to base your comments off of. I mean, there's nothing here that we can refer to.
Yeah.
Linda, I think that, and I like that, and I'll come back to staff on that for a second. I think that as the Historic Site Preservation Board, I think that what we basically want to accomplish is the tearing down of a property down to one wall or down to a chimney under the definition of a remodel. And so one of the challenges, I think, is going to be to define what a remodel is. I don't think the city can afford a preservation officer or the person you just described. And so it does fall to, I think, building and safety, to planning, to look at a project from the remodel point of view and somehow let that person have more responsibility to say to the applicant, well, gee, if you're removing 90% of the property, that's not really a remodel. That's a reconstruction, or that's a something else. So this is going to be a big task. Flint, are you aware of any ordinances for cities that might help us format what we're hoping to accomplish?
First, I need you to define what you want to accomplish, and then I can look for
Right.
ordinances
Okay.
that match that.
Well, so let's start there. It's the tearing down of a high percentage of the property, leaving a wall, a chimney, a slab, that certainly isn't a remodel. That's a renovation. That's a reconstruction. So I think that's basically where we want to start.
Yeah.
I'll come to Dick, please.
Yeah, following up on that and responding to Linda, when I did the research on the demo as it relates to no demo without the replacement plans being in place, a permit being allowed. Also, when I did that, and I found those 5 cities, they also, some of those cities address exactly what you're talking about as to the percentage of demo that is going to occur on any property. So I have a few examples that we could share with you, and it would help staff as well, because it has been done by some other cities. Comes to my mind is West Hollywood is one of them, and also up in St. Helena. And I'm trying to recall the other ones, whether They didn't all have that component as well, but we do have some material that we could use as a starting point. And it seems like that, I remember a couple of them were like 50%, if more than 50% was going to be requested to be remodeled or to be actually demoed. And there was one of the cities that had it down to 25%. So I think the percentage idea then becomes becomes a good barometer of what to use. And I know that there, as far as, I think, Todd, you found that it was a very short period of time to be able to go into the database, but it was like 45 seconds to determine the number of years that would come before engineering. I know there was a concern about the number of remodels that happened last year and the time, so that obviously can be easily handled. The second part is not as easy to be handled. But I think we could use these as guidelines, and I'd be happy to get that report back out, and we could give it to Flynn, and you could decide whether it's a good thing to distribute or not.
Linda?
Question of Flynn. Flynn, do we have any percentages in our current ordinance?
No, we don't.
So when someone comes to the city and they want to do a remodel, all they do is present plans?
Correct. They submit for a building permit.
And that's it?
Yeah.
The planner will go over the plans?
Mm-hmm. With the exception of Class 1 properties. Class 1 properties always come to HSPB for a certificate of approval.
Right.
But anything else just goes through a building permit process.
And if we change it to a certain percentage, 25%, how will we train staff to recognize this is the new criteria? That
When you adopt it as a code requirement, then staff is trained on that code requirement. But you need to clearly establish in your code what that threshold is.
Right.
So for example, we've been using a percentage. You would define that percentage as either 25% or 50% of the existing gross square footage of the residence. Anything more than that would require some type of discretionary review, something along those lines. And that's fairly easy to do. And then again, if we apply it to Class 3 structures, we know that's anything that is defined as a Class 3 structure. And that's information that generally is easily obtained.
And staff is aware of Class 3 structures and what the guidelines are for that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And they're
so-
trained to be able to, did you say?
Yes.
They are trained.
Once the ordinance is adopted, they
Yeah.
would be trained in terms of how to apply the ordinance.
Okay, just a sec, thanks, Dan. As we're going through this little list here, let's move off of applicability. And we do feel, for the purposes of this initial conversation, that it applied to all Class 3 properties, both residential and commercial? Yes. Okay, so we've talked about applicability. Then the threshold requirement, the scope of the review, what actions, all remodeling work, only partial demolition. And so I think that I see the board leaning towards that percentage. And before we define what that percentage is, we'll come back to some more discussion. I think Dan was next. Bill, please. Dan.
One of the houses that triggered all of this is the Clark House on Lola, and I've been following it. It's reframed now, the part that's going to be built. Only about 1/3 of that house was torn down, just an FYI. It was the center part, which was the most characteristic of the structure. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it doesn't look to me like they're building back too much bigger or too much different than what was there. So that's with like 1/3 being torn down.
Okay. Well, Bill's next. I'm so. Sure, of
To his
course.
question, so would that fall into percentage, or would that fall into prior to 1969, where the review would come in?
But we're trying to come up with the criteria. That would have come in anyway. It's a Class 3 structure. But if they're basing it on square footage, that part could still be torn down. If we had a 50% designation, this Clark house would have passed 50%. Less than 50% was torn down. It was the center section that was torn down, but less than 50% was torn down. So it would not have been reviewed.
Okay. But Dan, have you actually seen in writing that 50% of it was torn down, or are you basing this on your own visual?
My visual.
Okay, all right. So there's still some unknown there.
Correct.
Bill?
I don't think percentage is a good way to go.
Okay.
What if that 25% were 20-foot tall Corinthian columns on the front of a modern house? We use in Santa Barbara not a percentage, but the loss of character-defining features, and those are defined for each style, and the front facade is what the street sees, what the public sees as the most important. So quite often we allow. You sort of keep the first 5 feet and you can do anything you want to the back as long as it doesn't get bigger and overwhelm what's in front.
So interesting, Bill. As Dan was saying, the center portion of this house, perhaps the most characteristic portion of the house, let's say it is this magnificent living room with stenciled ceilings and a stone fireplace. You would allow that to go, given that they kept the 5 feet of the front elevation?
We only concern with the exterior.
Understood. Okay.
And the street elevation. So if there's a roof involved, the roof would be saved. And anything, they could do anything behind the ridge, basically.
Understood. Okay. All right. Todd?
So I was going to add what Bill just said, that there needs to be some sort of provision in there with respect to saving the street frontage or what appears from the street. And so to address what Dan had said, that if there were a provision in the new ordinance that basically restricted what could have been done from the street, say they could have torn down 75% of the house and they restricted what could be changed on the street facade of the house, that would have prevented that from happening. So that's an easy thing, I think, to rectify, is that there needs to be both, whether or not it's, characteristic of the house or percentage of the house, but certainly in addition to that, the street facade of the house. So planning knows not only that 75% of it or 25% of it is being altered, what is or where is that alteration taking place?
So, Flynn, this discussion that we're having now, does this fall under the threshold bullet point here?
Yeah, absolutely. You are defining exactly what you want to see come before you, what can be done at a staff level. So I think you're giving clear direction there.
Okay. I'd like the board to discuss for a few minutes Bill's suggestion that it not be a percentage, but more of the elimination of character-defining elements that were previously defined on all styles. I don't know that we have those character-defining characteristics already defined throughout our entire inventory of properties, Spanish and modern and...
Yeah, we wouldn't have that for each and every Class 3 property, and so it's something that staff would have to do on an individual basis, and I'm assuming that the individual in Santa Barbara has to do the exact same thing. They look at what is the appearance of the structure to date and what are the changes that are proposed, and does it modify the character of the existing residence.
We have a lovely booklet that you can get online. Except for the modern period, which we don't care about up there.
So would that require more staff to do something like this?
It would require more staff time to do it that way. And that's one of the things that we can get into in a later discussion as we get a little bit further along in starting to craft this, is talking about the impacts of going one way versus the other. When you have a percentage, that's tied strictly to square footage, that's something quick and easy that building and safety could do. When you get into talking about character-defining features, you need someone with a little bit higher skill level to be able to interpret and apply that criteria. And so that's something that might require additional staff time to do. So again, it goes back to how you choose to set the threshold and what you're looking at. We accordingly would give you recommendations as to how that might impact staff. But again, I think it's helpful to have this discussion to decide what you think is really important. And then once we do that, we will craft the ordinance accordingly with the resources that we have available to us.
Dan?
What if what's existing is ugly?
Subjective.
You know? But not every house that's 40 years old or 35 years old is a good example of what it was to be. Sometimes an old house is an old house.
Well, and thank you for that. You know, my concern would be that they're not going to tear the house down. They're not going to add square footage or reduce square footage, but they are going to change out every single window in the house. And windows would certainly fall under character-defining characteristics. So the threshold, I think here, we've had a couple of things we've talked about. The front elevation, maintaining the front elevation, making up that first 5 feet on the depth of the house, a percentage of the house being torn down or renovated. So how do we define that down? Or for the purposes of just moving this forward, can we have a part of this discussion both a character-defining removal and a percentage?
Yes.
And then we'll kind of narrow
we can look
it
at both options and then
down as we go.
Discuss what might work best for us.
All right, so
Mr. Chair.
to define, yes, please, Bill.
To Dan's comment, what happens in Santa Barbara was if a house is of a certain age and work is proposed, the application comes in, and then a very brief analysis is done to determine if it is an historic resource or not, really an historic resource or not, and it meets the criteria that anything does. And if on a preliminary level, done by staff, it does, then it moves forward in the historic structures report. If not, then it's sort of like, I've looked at it, no, it's just ordinary. So it has to meet at least a few of the criteria for designation.
I always appreciate the reference to Santa Barbara and the experience that you bring to us from Santa Barbara. But we also know that in Santa Barbara, you don't care about the modern. But here...
We're starting to.
Okay, well, catch up.
It's getting to be 50 years old. That's our threshold.
Okay. So we do have that extra challenge here because we do have great 20s Spanish and we do have great 50s and 60s modern. So board, shall we move off of threshold by saying that the curb appeal, the 5-foot depth on what the public sees from the street be a part of the threshold criteria as well as a percentage? And should it be a 50%? Should it be 25%? For the purposes of just moving from here on.
What I'd recommend, let's not set the percentage here and now.
Okay.
Let's look at both of those options as things that you want to explore further. And then again, we can go back to other ordinances and see how they apply that and look at other examples.
Okay.
But should it be just the facade on the street, or should it be a little more extensive? In other words, if you're looking at a property and you can also see some sidelines, at least X number of feet on each side, if we're going to be doing this change anyway, do you think, Bill, that it should be strengthened to include a little bit more than just the facade?
If it were a corner property, if it were a corner property, certainly one would see more
Yeah.
than just the front. Sure. Bill?
What happens behind the facade can't overwhelm what happens on when you see it
Right.
from
No,
the
I
street.
understand that.
So it's what you see from the street, which includes the roof and, you know, a wraparound.
Okay.
So, I mean, but we do allow like second-story additions, as long as they're done within the style, I mean, within the, you know, within, appropriate to the architecture. But again, all houses aren't created equal, so there is what's required for, nothing required for the ordinary, a lot required of anything that is potentially historic.
I guess what I'm thinking is if you know, if you're not looking at the house dead on, but you're looking at it from the side, and it's like, all of a sudden you've got this quirky look, that could we not extend it at least, not on the interior? Would it make sense to do that? I guess
Yes, it does, and Santa Barbara's changing.
Oh, okay. All right, good. All right, good. So I think that, keep that in mind then.
All right. Dan?
What if you don't see the house from the street at all? Like in Old Las Palmas, there's a lot of houses that I don't know what they look like.
Well, I think that, and Bill, if I'm hearing you, it's not necessarily whether I can see it or not from the street. There might indeed be a wall, or there might indeed be a hedge, but it is still the front elevation of the house, it's the skin of the house, it's the wraparound port. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, Dan, are you, okay. Flynn, do you have enough from us on the threshold now to kind of start to craft something?
Yeah, I think I do. And if you're comfortable with that, what I might recommend is that we start looking at other ordinances and bring some materials back to you. We can have further discussion, then we can get into other things such as criteria, how does that impact staff, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit more work that can be done now that we have some clear direction from you all in terms of what you would like to see, that we can begin looking at other examples and present some things to you.
Well, then you feel you have enough now, or should we continue our discussion and talk about criteria as well?
If you have other thoughts that you'd like to share with us, let's go ahead and do that now. But again, I don't feel like you have to address everything right now.
All right, well, let's just go through them, and there might be some additional comments. So let's look at the criteria for evaluation. What criteria should be utilized in determining whether to approve or deny applications? Todd?
Well, so just to address what Flynn just said, I would also look at the ordinance for Pasadena and South Pasadena, because they both have applicable ordinances that would be good for us to look at. And then in that vein, we also should look at what was also brought up is what and if there are penalties if this adopted ordinance is violated. And so I know, for example, that South Pasadena has a rather strict penalty if you tear down a house without a permit. And so I think there also needs to be teeth to this, more so than, you know, a doubling of permit fees. And so we also need to look at not only what does the ordinance say, but if the ordinance is violated, what happens is equally important. That's.
You know, I think Flynn has hit the nail on the head with bringing us back information so we can proceed with these other things. I'm not sure that I can address, you know, a criteria without seeing some other ordinances and knowing what to look for.
Okay, I'm good with that. All right, so I just want to hit all the bullet points, and that might be the same response to the remainder of them. So criteria for evaluation, we'll address that a little later when we have some more information brought back to us. The anticipated volume of applications, of course, this is something that will definitely impact the staff, the city, this board in general. I guess we'll just have to look at how other cities do handle it, and if indeed staff is trained on the new ordinance, a lot of the responsibility is going to fall to them to determine what they can and cannot approve at the counter and what should come to us or not. So that's, any other comments on the anticipated volume of the applications? Okay. Impacts to the HSPB meeting schedule. Well, I mean, here we have a classic example of a light agenda, We've often had agendas that haven't been so light. So I don't know whether we really can talk about the impacts to our schedule. Oh, I thought you were going to say something. No? Okay. All right. So maybe we'll look at that one again, too, in our next conversation. And then, of course, that ties to the impacts to the staff. Those are going to go hand in hand. And then the historic preservation purpose. How does the proposal fit within the purpose and mission of the Historic Site Preservation Board and the goals and objectives of the City of Palm Springs General Plan? So I think what we're talking about is we are talking about ultimately amending our ordinance that is going to impact our historic preservation purpose, and I think it will further the purpose of the board. Any comments on any of those other bullet points?
Sure, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, the whole effort is so that a house that has historic merit, is worth saving, doesn't lose its integrity. So that when we come back later and want to designate it, we don't say, oh, it's been so remodeled that it's lost its integrity. I mean, that's the whole goal of this whole effort, rather than just preserving old houses. Not all houses are worth saving, not all buildings. I mean, not all history is pretty either, but, you know, I mean, that's why we do this. And so we have to carefully sort of like guide our way through what is worth saving, and then save it, and save its integrity, so that we can meet the integrity requirements later.
Dan?
One of the things that I think that we also, because this is Palm Springs, and this is a center of very creative architecture and contemporary architecture, mid-century and moving forward, is that we always have to keep in mind that just because it's one certain style of a house, that it couldn't have a more contemporary addition or be more creatively looked at rather than preserved. And I know Santa Barbara is more about preserving what is there or into a mission style. And I think our mission needs to be to encourage great contemporary architecture, even if it's added onto an existing structure. And we need to take a much more liberal view of that because of where we are.
Well, I think that, I certainly don't disagree with you, but I think that this board is quite astute in that area. 401 Merito.
Right.
Quite a large addition is being put onto that house, and I don't recall any objections from the board here. So I think we're yeah, up to speed.
The orchid tree is another good example, and then we're going to add the new addition.
Excellent, yeah. So I think it's a point well made, but I feel comfortable that at least this sitting board has been very open to adaptive reuse of historic buildings by new construction. One thing I would like, as we close our discussion on this discussion of possible ordinance to address review process for remodeling of historic structures, is somehow to define what a remodel is. I mean, you know, in my business, Todd, in your business, I deal with people remodeling all day long. And remodeling is putting in a new kitchen, updating the bathrooms, putting down some new floors. That's how I would define remodel, making subtle but yet significant changes to an existing structure. When we talk about the removal of a structure or large portions of a structure, I no longer think of that as a remodel. So I would like somehow to better define what what a remodel is. So, and that'll only help staff, I think, as well, when they see these permits come through. Anything else? Okay. Will this be agendized again, or will this remain as a discussion item?
Sorry. We will probably keep this as a discussion
Okay.
item as we present additional information to you. I don't know that we'll have something together for you next month, but probably by the month of May, we'll have additional ordinances to look at, and we
Okay.
can further this discussion.
All right. Dick?
Yeah, I just have a question. So, let's say a house has been, some things have been done to the facade, but the overall architecture is still, you know, actually quite visible, and, you know, you can, you know, so let's say just a few things have been done. So does this mean if we do this, just want to be careful that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Does this mean then that there is not a way that that house could not qualify for designation? So as an example, let's say the rear of the house is just beautifully maintained and there's been nothing messed with whatsoever, but there's been some elements in the front, just so that we can have some flexibility that the whole integrity, or that the property still could meet integrity. Is there a way that, so we don't box ourselves totally in, is there some kind of language that could be done that would, on a case-by-case basis, accomplish that?
Consider the discussion we had over the Holden House
Yeah.
very recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a very difficult time saying that that had not been compromised. And I don't think it should have been allowed to have been compromised the way it was. And I was only concerned with the front of the house, the street facade. Whatever they did to the back windows was no concern to me. Whatever they did to the inside was of no concern to me. But if I were to drive by that house and look at that house and go, nope, 90s remodel. And that's what I would hope we would try to prevent. As enlightened as that design might have been, still,
Right.
it's not what was built. And slump block is a character-defining feature of the mid-century modern by certain practitioners.
Okay, Todd?
I think we have enough recent examples that have come before this specific group of people, the board as it's seated right now, that would apply really well for this. The Holden House is one, the Morito House is another, the John Porter Clark House. So as we're moving this discussion forward, I think we have some decisions that we've made in the past that will help guide how we want to structure those decisions in the future, essentially. Like, okay, so I think Morito is a quintessential successful example of really what worked. And I think obviously the John Porter Clark House is an example of what didn't work. And the William Holden House may be somewhere between the two. And so, you know, I think having those under our belt will help us moving forward and maybe give staff some idea as to, you know, how to help guide us also. I mean, I will also say, I just need to go on the record as being a little concerned about waiting until May. I understand you're really swamped. And I'm worried about, you know, what happens in the interim. And so that, I just need to say that. I understand.
Get me more staff.
Yeah, no, well, so, council, he needs more staff.
All right, so to complete, we've completed that discussion item of 5C. We are now at board member comments, and I have a couple that I'd like to start with, or if somebody else has some burning issues, I'll defer the microphone to you. Okay, so in reviewing the minutes to the February meeting, Two projects did come up in my review of the minutes, and it was certainly the William Holden property, the discussion that we had about integrity, Mr. Medrad's comments, and when we voted unanimously to recommend it to the City Council, it was a vote of 7-0 with a number of these conditions. And Bill, you and Todd, if you don't mind, if you wouldn't review those minutes again, because this will be going to the council soon. And I think if we can certainly avoid any conflicts or questions from the council about the issue of integrity, I've certainly learned more from you today, Bill, on the, I think it's page 3 of 8 on the minutes. It's at almost the last paragraph before the bottom of the page. I've learned a lot more from you this morning about, I certainly understand how our Class 1 historic designations protect the skin of the house, the exterior of the house. And to hear from you this morning about that sort of that elevation, what you do see from the street, or what, even if you don't see it from the street, it's what would be visible from the street if it weren't, you know, blocked by a hedge or what have you. So under our board member comments, I would just like to ask the two of you to, because I think this is scheduled to go to the council soon, and there might be...
Mr. Chair, we actually have it scheduled to go to City Council next week on March 21st.
Okay.
So we've already submitted our report.
Okay.
If there are any changes to the minutes that you'd like to make, I would need to have those by, let's see, today's Tuesday. I'd need to have those by tomorrow so I can slip those in.
Let's see if both Bill and Todd are fine with the way the minutes call out here. And I'll give you a second to look at those, because then I have even a bigger concern relative to why I asked for the Steve Mcqueen to be reviewed. So, gentlemen?
Well, to ask Flynn, the non-contributing elements, I guess we're clear in the report, but the loss of significant altered characteristics be included. What was included in the staff report?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Okay, I'm looking at item bullet 2, the loss or significantly altered characteristics. What were included in the staff report? The slump block wall.
Let's see. I'm looking for bullet number 2.
It's under. It should be 5, I guess.
Let's see, under the motion.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, it is bullet 2.
The lost or significantly altered characteristics be included. I don't have the resolution here in front of me, Mr.
But I would want it to be the slump block.
Okay.
And then the site walls.
Slump block and site walls. Got it.
And the windows on the street elevation, and was it the door?
Yeah.
The entryway.
The entry door.
Okay, so I'll add those 4 things.
Todd, any comment?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Flynn. Moving on to my second board member comment, I'd like to comment on the Steve Mcqueen project. I'd like to ask first that we have the Steve Mcqueen house a review on the April agenda, so that it is an agendized item. And here's where I'm going with this. Again, referring to our minutes, page 6 of 11. And I remember this as well as without the actual minutes, but the minutes certainly do help. Member Lavoie expressed concerns about the lack of analysis of integrity in the historic resource report and was concerned about recommending designation of a site under restoration. Typically, it is of a site fully restored. Member Hayes noted his strong dissatisfaction with the process of this nomination. He noted the full demolition of major parts of the house and no idea of how they were going to be restored. So when we came to the motion and the vote, it was a 5 in favor, 2 opposed, and it does explain why Mr. Lavoie and Mr. Hayes opposed the nomination. But it was recommended to the City Council based on criteria 2, 4, and 5. 2, for staff to document the mature trees on the site for inclusion in the contributing elements of the site, that the owner provide full documentation, photos, and narrative of the restoration process, including the working building permit drawings, that staff arrange site inspections. So I do recall that there was some of us got a site inspection and some of us didn't. And there was a discussion about getting the rest of the board up to the house. Did that happen? Has everyone on the board received a site visit? Okay. Flynn, this probably isn't anywhere near going to the council yet, this nomination?
Not yet.
That you know of? So staff is indeed still waiting for the homeowner to provide some narrative.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough to go up on Southridge fairly recently, and for those of us who were at the house, I think in November, I've seen no change since the house we visited in November. The living room is still gone. There is no restoration yet of the property. So I'm concerned that we, as a board, approve this nomination, and in hindsight, and I take responsibility for this as the chair, I should have heard Member Lavoie and Member Hayes' concerns and dissatisfaction. So before this goes to the council with our recommendation for Class 1, I think we need some more information here.
Okay. A couple of things to just keep in mind.
Please.
Number one, this was not initiated by the property owner.
Understood.
They are not requesting it. And we currently, it's not a Class 1 structure, so we have no ability to make them submit this information to us. We can require them to submit building permits for the work they're doing, but we can't require them to do much more than that. So it's through the goodness of the property owner that, number one, we can get you back for site tours, and number two, that they will provide the information that request other than what is already required under our code.
Okay.
So again, just a couple of things to remember relative to
No,
that application.
always, that's why you sit in that chair. But it's true. No, I always like that you kind of bring me back to...
Sorry, I'm the harsh dose of reality
No,
occasionally.
I so respect it because it does help me. Okay, so...
Mr. Chair?
Please.
We are back to the discussion of review process for remodeling of historic structures.
Thank you. You stole my thunder, but I was coming back around to that. So, is the Steve Mcqueen house fully permitted for what they're doing?
Not fully yet. And that's probably why you haven't seen any additional work being done.
Okay, all right. So, Todd?
Well, so that would also lead to the sense of urgency with any changes, and I probably a broken record, but
I'll share with you our workload at the end of the meeting under staff comments.
No, I think everybody here at the board is empathetic of the great work that you do, the massive workload that you have. And, you know, as a planning commission watcher, as an AAC watcher, as a city council watcher, I know that you have your hands and fingers on so many, many more areas and boards than just us. So I think we all respect that. However,
If you don't keep reminding me, you're
Yeah.
afraid I'll forget.
Well, and I think the Steve Mcqueen house, it is it's such an important house. It has the celebrity provenance. It has the architectural provenance. It's siting. There's so much about it that's important, and I do understand that that we initiated the Class 1 on the property. They are not fighting it. They didn't. They have not. No, but I think that there is just some concern that, especially if they're not fully permitted, just if it weren't a Class 3 house, even if it weren't being recommended for historic designation, it should be fully permitted, I think. Okay, all right. Anybody else on that? No. Okay. Any other board comments?
Yes.
Please.
We could have a status on the Wellwood Murray patio project. My understanding when we left that last is there was going to be maybe even a joint discussion between the library board and ours.
Let's see, I'll double check on that. Our project manager is no longer with the city.
Who?
Franco Lori.
Oh.
Yeah, he went to the city of Rancho Cucamonga where he lives.
Oh.
So he's working there now. Tom Garcia, the city engineer, who that would fall to his responsibility, will provide an update to you next month.
Okay. Oh, next month, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the next item is on the Racket Club. Do you know, is that getting closer to being scheduled to the council?
Getting closer. I'm now looking at April dates.
April, you think it's going
Yeah.
to be April?
Yeah.
Okay. And, okay. So I assume that's just a matter of scheduling, not, we're waiting on
The applicant wants to give me additional materials, and then I need to get it onto an agenda. So,
Okay.
Could you let us know when that?
But can
comes
that
forward?
be
absolutely.
sort of a hard deadline, or do they just continue just like, okay, when it gets ready, I'll give it to you?
Yeah, at the direction of the city manager, we can make that a hard deadline.
Good. That'd be great.
I have one other comment about the Steve Mcqueen house. I think I'm personally too invested in the house in that I like it as much as I do. This is hypothetical. To your knowledge, Flynn, has the HSPB ever pulled a recommendation for a Class 1?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right.
Okay.
You
And
could do a
my-
reconsideration of the motion, but I think that deadline's passed.
Okay, all right. Todd?
It- Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. Dick, were you
yeah,
finished?
I got one more.
Oh,
So-
please,
no,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
And also, Flynn, would you be able to give us an update on the town and country? I think you're on that committee now.
Yes, we're hoping to have a subcommittee meeting with the city council subcommittee members last week. Unfortunately, they were not available to have that. We've got one scheduled, I believe, on the 19th, which is next week.
Okay.
At that point, we'll know if they have materials that would be ready to come before the HSPB on your April agenda. Essentially, what they're looking at doing is doing some painting of the structures to return them back to the original paint colors, and some minor cleanup of the properties until they can get to a point where they can start looking at a master plan for restoration of the property.
Right. But also, are they looking at, there's a lot of surface construction issues there, you know, with the condition of it, rather than just slapping paint over the top of it. Was that continue to be addressed?
The property owner has retained Marmol Radziner
Right.
to do the repainting and look at the immediate repairs to the property, so they are looking at that, yes.
Okay.
Do you have an update on the cork and bottle?
The only thing I know on Cork and Bottle is that the property fell out of escrow. So I don't know exactly what the city will be doing with the sale at this point in time. But the applicant has withdrawn their application. There was an application to do a hotel that would have involved the cork and bottle. But again, that application has been withdrawn at this point in time.
Okay. Anyone else? I would ask staff to review what Mr. Menrad brought today, the proposed revision to Palm Springs Historic Preservation Ordinance. In just glancing at it, I mean, this is a significant, they're proposing a significant rewrite to the ordinance. So I'd like staff to advise us on the validity of their suggested changes, et cetera. And is this how changes to historic ordinances traditionally come about?
No, they typically are initiated either by the city council or city staff or upon the recommendation of our boards and committees.
Okay.
So we've had a discussion about integrity at a recent meeting. I believe that the board would like some further investigation of how we might address that within our ordinance. This is provided to you as a suggestion, and so again, you can take that as a suggestion and to inform you in further discussions on integrity.
All right. Would you inform us after you've reviewed these suggested changes?
Yes, I would be more than happy to
All right,
do so.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, seeing no more board comments. Staff?
Okay, let me just go through a few things. Mr. Lyon had reported to you last month on the markers that we have in process.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, based on the volume and the dollar amount of that contract, we have to submit it out to 3 separate bidders instead of using a single source. So those are going to be delayed as we go through purchasing in that process. But we are working on that as quickly as possible. Let's see, we've already discussed the workshop. And then Cornelia White, we had discussed preparing a video and documenting what is there before the restoration work begins. Mr. Lyon is coordinating with Councilmember Roberts and Bert Simonis.
Oh, Bert Simonis, yes.
Okay.
He's a filmmaker, local filmmaker.
Okay, so he is coordinating with
On
those
that
two
thought,
individuals. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had also mentioned that the Palm Springs Historical Society has a videographer, Susan. Close friend of mine, Susan.
You can send me an email.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because she has equipment, she has a crew. She has been documenting the Palm Springs Historical Society's talks program, and so it seems to me that this is a natural person to kind of make a
She would be,
documentation.
yeah.
Absolutely. Let's see, and then as I had mentioned, we will include a report on the Wellwood Library Courtyard on next month's agenda. Francis Stevens School and Park.
Yes.
Again, I think I had mentioned that we have Steve Kalon doing a history for us that will inform the landscape plan for that site. Haven't gotten a report back in terms of his study yet, but we are still working on that. One of the other things that we are working on is OHP has grants to certified local governments. We are proposing to apply for a grant to assess the status of our city-owned Class 1 properties. I believe we have about 8 Class 1 properties. And what we would like to do is do a maintenance plan for those properties. You all have suggested in the past that the city doesn't do a good job of maintaining our Class 1 properties, and I would agree. And so what we're proposing to do is to do a study and a maintenance plan for the city's Class 1 properties, which will help to allocate funding for repairs and maintenance in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards on those properties. So again, we are pursuing a grant. We'll keep you informed as to how that process goes. The last thing I wanted to share with you, talking about workload. That way. As we go through the annual budget cycle, one of the things I do is just keep track of how many applications we process in a year. That talks to a certain degree of the workload that my staff members have. Just focusing on the very last column, which is entitled Fiscal Year 16-17. That's the most recent year, which concludes on June 30th of 2017. So just looking at that past year, we processed a total of 1,666 cases and reviews during the course of the year. What you'll see is that's been fairly consistent over the last 3 years. The first year that I was here with the city in fiscal year 14-15, that was our high point. We had 1,786 cases. One of the positive things that has happened is in April of 2016, I received 2 additional full-time employees. We had 2 part-time employees prior to that were on a contract basis, but I received 2 full-time employees in April of 2016. And so that's helped with our workload. If you go down to the second smaller table below the first one there, what I do is take the number of cases every year, divide that by my number of planners that I have working on those cases, and you can see that each of my planners has handled approximately 238 cases and reviews in the course of a year. So if you look at that in terms of workload, they're processing a lot of things. And so while we may only have, I guess we have about 30, 35 applications that come before the Historic Site Preservation Board every year. Planning Commission sees about 80 to 85. Architectural Advisory Committee sees probably about 85 to 90. There's only a small percentage of the things that we do that actually come before our boards and commissions. There's a lot of ministerial reviews that we do in addition to that. One of the things that this does not tell the story about is that there's also code changes that are in process. For example, I was tied up with our sign ordinance for a good portion of last year, the cannabis zoning regulations. Right now, the Planning Commission is in the process of looking at changes to our Plan Development District ordinance. They're also looking at revisions to our golf course ordinance in terms of repurposing of golf courses. So there's some additional things in there. So again, I'm keeping the needs of the HSPB in my mind as I'm thinking of these things, and we will have things. Demolition is one of the things that we'll have in process here very shortly. Planning Commission wants to work with you on that, and then the changes that we've discussed today relative to remodeling. So I'll fit those into the process as well, but I just wanted you to be aware that even though you all see just a small portion of the number of applications that we have, as staff members are busy and are trying to keep things going, and that's one of the reasons why Mr. Lyon is working this morning instead of here reporting at your meeting. So with that, that concludes my comments to you, and thank you very much.
It prompted me to think of something else. I think I did ask for the Mcqueen house to be agendized for April. Unless there really isn't anything, I mean, that you can...
No, we will have other things in April.
All right. Yeah. And then again, when we voted on our work plan late last year or early this year, I believe we did initiate a historic resource study for the Historic Tennis Club District. Mm-hmm. Has that begun?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Could we get a little follow-up on that next month then, please?
Certainly.
Okay. Anything else, board?
Mr. Chair, this draft that we received of the non-Native American populations.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to talk about
thanks,
that.
Linda.
I thought this was great. I thought it was very interesting. The only thing I would ask is if we could insert a map so we could become more familiar, because there were streets in here like Las Vegas Boulevard. I don't even know where Las Vegas Boulevard is.
Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful to recognize the areas, but otherwise it's great. Thank you for it.
And that reminded me, that's one of the things I will schedule for your April meeting is a discussion of this. I wanted to give this to you a month in advance so you had the opportunity to review it ahead of time. And again, this came from public comment of one of the things that they felt that we needed to include in our historic resource survey.
Okay. We've completed board member comments. Staff has completed their comments. No other comments or discussions, questions? All right, we'll adjourn the meeting at 10:39. Thank you.